Opening a bottle of medicine today is a process of clearing obstacles. You have to remove a plastic shrink wrap, press and twist a child-proof cap, and peel back a glued foil seal. Before September 1982, none of those barriers existed. A consumer could walk into a store, unscrew a cap right off the shelf to check the pills, and put the bottle back without leaving a single trace. On the morning of September 29th, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman took 2 extra-strength Tylenol capsules for a minor cold. She collapsed shortly after and was pronounced dead before the school day had even fully begun. Across town that same day, a 37-year-old postal worker named Adam Janus took the same over-the-counter medication for chest pain. He died almost immediately. These were ordinary morning routines involving the most trusted painkiller in the country. No one realized that the lack of protection on the bottle had turned a household staple into a fatal blind spot. That evening, Adam Janus's family gathered at his home to mourn his sudden, unexplained passing. His brother and sister-in-law, struggling with the stress and headaches of the day, reached for the exact same bottle of Tylenol that Adam had used earlier. Within minutes, both of them also collapsed and died. First responders were suddenly facing a statistical impossibility: 3 healthy people from a single household dead in one day from an invisible cause. Over the next few days, the death toll reached 7. The victims were strangers to one another, scattered across the Chicago area, with nothing seemingly connecting them. There was no information and no warning. The killer didn't need to be in the room. They had already finished their work days earlier on a store shelf. It was a nurse, Helen Jensen, who first noticed the pattern. She realized that every victim had used the same brand of extra-strength Tylenol capsules. This image shows a pulled-apart capsule revealing lethal potassium cyanide. A fraction could kill an adult. In the background, the open bottle looks perfectly safe. The killer simply swapped the medicine for poison, returning them to shelves as random landmines. Without instant digital alerts, police drove through neighborhoods using loudspeakers and handing out physical flyers, racing to reach people before they took their next dose. Johnson & Johnson responded by recalling 31 million bottles of Tylenol nationwide. It cost the company over $100 million, but it was the only way to ensure no more poisoned bottles remained in circulation. This event revealed a new vulnerability in the American way of life. The retail supply chain itself had been used as a delivery mechanism for murder. The entire over-the-counter drug industry was on the verge of collapse. If they couldn't guarantee that a bottle hadn't been opened before it reached a kitchen cabinet, consumers would never trust the products again. This led to the rapid development of packaging, like this printed safety seal, which became mandatory within months. Peeling back a foil barrier today means you are interacting with the direct legacy of the Chicago murders. But while the industry successfully hardened its packaging, the legal system was unable to provide the same resolution for the families of the 7 victims. Investigators eventually focused on a man named James William Lewis. He sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the killings. The letter contained a suspicious detail. It was postmarked before the public even knew that tampered Tylenol was the cause of the deaths. Lewis was convicted of extortion and served 13 years in prison. However, he was never charged with the murders because the FBI could not find evidence placing him in Chicago when the bottles were planted. This photo shows Lewis in his later years. Despite the FBI reopening the case in 2009 and taking his DNA, no new evidence emerged. He lived as a free man until his death in 2023. The Tylenol murders changed how every consumer product in America is sealed and sold, but 40 years of investigation failed to produce a conviction. The legacy of this case isn't just the safety seals on our medicine. It is the fact that despite decades of forensic advances and national attention, the person who turned these bottles into weapons was never identified.
Keep watching. Your next video starts now.
On New Year's Eve in 2022, Cohasset, Massachusetts was a quiet, affluent coastal enclave. Inside one of these homes, 39-year-old Anna Walshe was hosting a dinner with her husband and a family friend. Her husband, Brian, was under house arrest at the time. He was awaiting sentencing for a federal fraud case involving counterfeit Andy Warhol paintings, a legal battle that had placed immense strain on the couple's marriage. Early the next morning, January 1st, Anna vanished. When her employer eventually reported her missing, Brian told police she had been called away for a work emergency in Washington, D.C. He claimed she took a rideshare to the airport and boarded a flight. This story created an immediate information vacuum. By framing Anna's disappearance as a sudden but routine business trip, Brian suggested her absence was a personal choice rather than the result of a crime. Prosecutors would later present a much darker account of that morning. They alleged that Anna was killed inside the home and that Brian then dismembered her body and disposed of the remains in dumpsters across the Boston area. Grave. This was a methodical attempt at physical erasure. If a body is never found, the primary piece of evidence in a murder investigation is gone. Pursuing a homicide case without a body is a significant legal challenge. Prosecutors must prove a death occurred and identify a cause of death using only circumstantial evidence, which often allows the defense to argue the victim is simply missing. Brian's strategy relied on a historical assumption of criminal law, that if the physical evidence is completely destroyed, a murder cannot be proven in court. Investigators began by attempting to verify the details of the airport trip Brian had described. They found no records of a rideshare picking up Anna Walshe on New Year's Day, and no flight manifests showed her boarding a plane at Logan International. On January 8th, the investigation moved from transit records to the Walshe home. In the basement, police discovered blood and a broken kitchen knife, indicators of a violent struggle that contradicted Brian's story of a routine departure. Even with the evidence in the basement, the case lacked the specific proof of intent required for a first-degree murder charge. Without a body, investigators still needed to prove the act was premeditated. The turning point came when forensic experts gained access to Brian Walshe's personal laptop. On January 1st, the day Anna vanished, someone used that laptop to search for how to dispose of a body, how to dispose of body parts, and how long a spouse must be missing before an heir can inherit their assets. Even when a user deletes their browser history, the underlying system logs remain. These time-stamped records dismantled Brian's claim that his wife had left for a work emergency. Before the trial, Brian pleaded guilty to misleading police and improperly disposing of a body. He admitted to dismembering Anna, but claimed he had simply panicked after finding her dead in their bed. Brian Walshe spent days cleaning his house and discarding physical evidence, but his digital footprint had already created a chronological record of his actions. The murder trial in late 2025 focused on whether the death was a tragic accident followed by panic or a calculated homicide. The defense described the events as a sudden, unexplained death. They argued that Brian's actions afterward were driven by a fear that he would be blamed and lose his children. The prosecution used the digital evidence and testimony regarding Anna's affair in Washington, D.C. to argue that the murder was premeditated. The search history provided the evidence of intent that is typically found through a physical autopsy. The queries made on the day of the disappearance allowed the jury to see Brian's thought process as the crime was being committed. The jury reached a verdict of guilty. Brian Walshe received a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Anna Walshe's remains have never been found. Her 3 young sons remain in state custody, growing up without either parent. This case serves as a reminder of the permanence of digital records. Human intent is now captured in ways that are nearly impossible to erase. Brian Walshe successfully hid the physical evidence of his crime, but his own browser history provided the timeline and motive he tried to conceal. In the modern era, data left behind is often more revealing than the crime scene itself.